Hey everybody, thanks for coming back. All right, let's get into our custom data views masterclass here. Should see that screen now for our presentation. And we'll go through some of our housekeeping here. So thank you, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Coffee and Bagel. Spent some time with other attendees. We will be randomly selecting one participant from that to be the winner of a $50 Amazon gift card. The winner will be receiving an email from us in just a few minutes, so please be on the lookout for that. At the end of the day, we'll announce all the Coffee and Bagel winners on the conference platform homepage. The session that you are joining now is our Custom Data Views Masterclass, which is going to be presented by Tom Royal, who's the product manager. She's one of our product managers here at ProLink. Joined us a couple years ago as a product owner, so has a lot of background in the design and kind of development stages of the products that we produce and the features that we produced over the last couple of years, and was very involved in developing our custom data views enhancement, has consulted a number of our clients in taking advantage of that. And it is more of a technical subject, so we appreciate him being the leader of this session. Just as a reminder, this is the last session of today, so we will pick things back up tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, with the first session being ProLink HFA, what's new and what's coming. So please tune in for that. Before we start our session, I'd like to just take a couple minutes to finish up those housekeeping items. So first, on the right-hand side of the screen, you should have access to that chat feature. Just click on the chat to begin chatting with your fellow attendees. Please, that's a great place to post questions or comments throughout the chat session, and we'll provide responses or follow up individually after the session. We'll do our best to respond to anything during the session as well. So keep that in mind. Please note that your posts are visible to all attendees. Okay. Resources, you guys know this is the area where you can download the materials from what we're covering in each session. So the actual presentation deck, slide deck, is going to be available there, as well as the recording. You can download those materials before, after, or during the session. And then we also wanted to make sure that you can see the on-demand sessions that we're offering this year. So if you scroll down, not on this event page, but on the home page of the conference, you can see playlists and individual sessions for ProLink Technology Live 2021 and 2022 subjects. So these sessions are HFA focused, multifamily focused, and supplemental to the live sessions that we're hosting this year. Definitely another layer of training to take advantage of and leverage. You know, we've reviewed all the content there, and it is still very relevant for all of the features covered today. So just take advantage of that if you would like some additional support or training on any of the subjects we have listed on that homepage. Okay, so now without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tom again. So Tom, thank you very much for being here. You can go ahead and take the screen and start your session. I'll be here in the background.
All right, thanks, Bree. Go ahead and get started. And here we go. Okay, so do want to thank everybody for joining this session today. And definitely a good way to end the day with some real high power, technical, complicated, concepts and things that we're going to go through. The good news is that, I'm going to kind of go through some basic things about custom data views, how they work, the data model. And then we're going to touch on all, 150 or so tables and data elements and all that. Joking a little bit, we're not going to go that deep. But what we are going to do today is, we're going to kind of go through what is a custom data view, how does it work, why would you want to use it, and then get a little bit into the ProLink data model and explain that a bit. We don't have time today to go into the entire ProLink data model. It is pretty extensive, but we are going to focus on a few of the primary tables that are out there, a lot of the common use cases that we see, the data that you're usually going to be working with as your starting point. We'll get into data relationships and diagrams, so we'll kind of try to remove some of the mystery how, like dev deals might attach to a property, how like dev deals may relate to TC deals and things like that. And then wanted to spend a little bit of time working with the different data types. So a lot of the different data types that you're going to run into as you work with data views and writing your SQL queries to build those, things like Picklists and bit fields and UDFs and things like that. And then finally, we're actually going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to build a data view live, try to demonstrate some of the concepts that we go through during this presentation. So wanted to just kind of try to put a little bit of a few tips in there, kind of show a little bit on my process that I use whenever we're building a query in a custom data view, and hopefully find some things that help you along the way. So jumping into what is a custom data view, it provides for the ability to create custom SQL queries. Basically, what it does is give you full ad hoc reporting capabilities within ProLink HFA. You can write in a extremely advanced SQL query to build out a data view that you can run. Those SQL queries can be used to join multiple database tables together. You can perform calculations, you can create summaries and other aggregations. So just about anything that you can do in writing a query for something like you might do for a report or a dashboard, you could also use that query, put it into the HFA custom data view functionality, and make that available for everybody to use within the system. Like regular data views, once it's created, very similar functionality. You can create your own kind of subviews off of that, custom filters, sorting, showing and hiding the columns, setting your order preferences, even the data types for the columns themselves. Very powerful functionality, but there's a little bit of danger inherent with that as well. So ETL data warehouse versus transactional data warehouses. If you've gone into the custom data view functionality, you'll see that there's two primary types by default. And what we highly recommend is that you use the ETL data warehouse data view. And what that does is that we actually have a ProLink ETL data warehouse that's optimized for reports. It's optimized for analytical performance. So when you create these queries and you create these custom data views, what they're going to do is they're going to take that data and they're going to move it over to that ETL data warehouse and make it available to run. Now with that, there is a delay. So and it's going to depend on when the ETL job runs, when it's scheduled to run. Usually that's typically overnight. So whatever information that you're compiling, it's going to run that night, move all that data over, and have that data view available. However, for the majority of use cases that we've seen that we run across, that's typically good, because usually these data views are used for things like monthly reporting, kind of complex queries, things like that. So the ETL data warehouse is typically the way to go. It runs much, much faster, like I said. Transactional database data views, that gives you the ability to create that data view in real time. And what that's going to do, it's going to query against a live transactional database. It's going to give you live results back from that transactional database. But there could be some performance impacts with that. And to put some controls in place, we've actually put an approval process. So if you want to use the live transactional database, if for whatever reason the ETL data warehouse is not going to meet your reporting or your analytical needs, you can request approval to have your database, or at least your query, analyzed. And we're going to take a look at that. We're going to determine, okay, this, based on what we see in there, doesn't have too many fields, not going to return too many records, and the performance is going to be okay. So that it can be run at any time, against the live transactional database. We do have information out on the support side. We do have information on the upside on how you can, request an approval process. And I could point out that button later on when we get into the live demo. Okay, so how does the ETL data warehouse workflow? And today in this demonstration presentation, we're going to focus on ETL data warehouse. We're going to assume that's the approach that we're going to take. So typically, and this is going to be the same whether you're creating this data view out at your agency or if it's someone here at ProLink, like if one of our professional services team members is creating this data view. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write the SQL query that's going to be used for the data view, and then we're going to create the data view to use that. The data view is based on the SQL query. It's going to require some knowledge with that. You're going to have to be able to write a select statement and figure out what tables and fields and everything that you want to use for it. The next step of that is that you're going to have to validate and test the view. There's going to be two stages of validation that I'll recommend. The first is validate it within your query itself, and we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of that. And then the second would be the actual custom data view functionality has validation logic in there. It's going to do some validation. It's going to do some checks to make sure that everything's in place, and it's going to provide the capability to do that. The third step is going to be publishing that data view. So when you create a data view initially, it's going to be what we call a draft status, and that's so that you can put it together, you can test it, you can try it, you can see if it's going to return the results. Because just like any other reporting project that you do, anything else, you want to make sure that you're testing the results coming back. You want to make sure everything's accurate, you're getting what you expect to get back before you deploy that out to everyone in the world. So you're going to work in that draft establish until you're confident that everything's in good shape, and then you're going to publish that. Once it's published, it's basically going to be available to everyone. And with an ETL data warehouse workflow, that happens once the job runs. So when you publish it, it's not going to actually show up for everyone until the ETL processor job runs. And that what it's going to do, it's going to copy all that data over to the ETL database. And then now the whole world or everybody in your system can see that data view and start running it. Again, that's a high level workflow, and we're going to go into some more specifics throughout this presentation. Okay, so before you begin, some prerequisites. As I mentioned, this is a very powerful utility, and it's got a little bit of danger to it. So we strongly recommend that you have Microsoft SQL Management Studio. It's a free tool. It lets you query database tables, write SQL queries, see the information, see the data, even see the relationships of the tables and the fields and everything that's within the database. And use that to access your backup ProLink database. I believe everyone should be receiving a backup ProLink database. If not, certainly reach out to us. That's something that we provide. So you can get that backup ProLink database. And that's going to be your testing ground. That's going to be where you're working to build your queries. It's a safe place to look at the information, it's a safe place to write queries, a safe place to do some testing with minimal impact. You're not going to be in production. Today, I'm actually going to be using SQL Management Studio as well. And as you'll see as I'm building this out, it has a lot of tools built into it to help you write your queries as well. When you're writing your query over in the custom data view screens, you're kind of flying a little bit blind. I mean, you can have your resources, you can have things over in your other screens to look at, but you're writing that query and you're kind of writing it and you're doing validate. You're writing it and doing validate. Whereas if you're writing in something like SQL Management Studio, you get real-time feedback, even suggestions for what the field names are. You should have some general understanding of relational databases and table structure. That's just something that you're going to have to join tables together. You're going to have to include data from Picklists. You're going to have to be able to understand how relational databases and all that stuff's put together. Now, I know sometimes that's not always possible. Sometimes you get thrown into a role, you're going to be like, hey, can you, somebody's going to put you in that place. You're going to go out there and, can you go write some queries and put something together? There is a lot of information available on the internet on, how relational databases work, table structure work, what is SQL or SQL structured query language. You should have some working knowledge on it to be, fully successful in these, but everybody starts someplace. So there's a lot of information out there if you do get stuck. And then as well, time. It takes time. Creating a custom data view requires planning. As I'm going to point out, it requires testing. So it does take some time to put together. It takes some time to think through what tables do you need. It takes some time to think through what is your data logic that you are going to need. Are there going to be any formulas? Do you have to do any validation? What are you going to do if you run across data that's not good? Are you going to ignore it? Or are you going to include it in your totals? So there's a lot of things when you're working with data that you really need some time and dedicated time to figure out. Again, planning and testing, and I'm actually going to show some samples and things that you can do to put a plan together. Okay, some SQL statement rules and guidelines. So these are rules and guidelines that we've put in place, and we've got kind of have some control in there, and we've got some guide rails to make sure that you're not going to do anything that's going to cause any major problems with the system. But with that said, only select statements are accepted. You're not going to be able to write things that creates tables and do updates or delete tables. We're not going to let you cause any major problems with the system. Some other little rules like select must be on the very first line. You have to actually make sure that you reference each column name explicitly. So you're going to have to, make sure each column name has a name, that there's no spaces in there. I will say that the ProLink database, for the most part, does a very good job of, not having spaces within the names. However, when you get into things like UDFs, where you can create UDFs with spaces in the names, it takes a little bit more thought to make sure that you don't include those spaces. A database column can only be added once, so you can't have like deal name and then have deal name again. It's going to validate that. It's going to tell you that you can only display it once. And then the first column must be a unique integer data type ID. An alias as a row ID, I'm going to show exactly what that means, but there has to be some unique identifier. I always recommend if you're pulling something for like dev deals, if you're building a query off of dev deals, you can use the dev deal ID. It's unique in the system. Same if you're building a query off of portfolio property ID. You can use a portfolio property ID, in the system. It's going to be unique. That's typically the very first column I add to my data view is that row ID and that unique identifier integer field. Now I'll say a lot of times when I'm called to kind of step in and help out, that'd be my first question, where you're using that as your row ID, because sometimes there might be duplicates, there might be things in there that are going to cause issues, and it will cause some strange behavior. And then columns that could be considered personally identifiable information, or PII. So things like SSN, password. We do have restrictions in place and controls that's not going to allow you to include that within your data view. So again, these are some statement rules and guidelines. This information is also on the custom data view screen, as well as the help material. Okay, so some tables you probably need to know about. These are some basic ones. There are a lot of tables that you may need to access depending on what your use case is and depending on what information that you're going to need to pull from. But the first one is dev deals. And one thing that's really nice about the database is typically the name of the table represents what it looks like in the UI. So dev deals is development deals and the related information around it. Dev deals may or may not have an associated portfolio property. TC deals, again, tax credit deals and related information. They may or may not have an associated dev deal, and the same with portfolio property. They may or may not have a portfolio property. It really depends on your business process and how you capture your information. I will always recommend going into the UI, looking to see where your fields are stored. Where's your information stored in the system? Portfolio properties, that's where your portfolio property information is going to be. There's a lot of other tables with these as well. You see dev deals and TC deals and portfolio properties, and there's going to be like portfolio property units and portfolio property locations and things like that. Entities, that is the home for any external party or parties that are attached to a deal or a property. So things like your general contractor, your architect, your owner, that information is going to be in the entities table. And as you'll see when I talk a little, go in the next couple of slides, we're going to go over some relationships and how you join those. Persons is your home for users of the system, as well as individual attached to deals and various roles. And then finally, user-defined field values. I do have a slide coming up on user-defined fields, talking about all the different tables that support that. User-defined fields, or whenever you include those in a query or include those in a report, there is some complexity to it, and it could almost do an entire session just based on user-defined field values itself. But I'm going to kind of show some helpful hints and some relationships to get you started. Okay, so moving on. When we look at something, like common tables and dev deals, for example, we've got a dev deals table. And this is a kind of an entity, or like an architecture diagram for the tables, an entity relationship diagram for the tables. Dev deals is going to be your primary table. I always recommend, if you're writing a report for dev deals, start with dev deals, because that's going to be your list of everything that you want to include in it. And as we'll see when we go into the live version of building these reports, we're going to see some things happen when we join tables to it. We might see the record count drop. We might see the record count increase. Those are going to be your indicators on, is information you're going to be duplicating? Is information not going to be included because of the way we did our join? Dev deals have a associated property for dev properties. Now, this is when this is property information. If you're not using portfolio properties, it's going to capture some of that property information over in dev properties. We also have these tables that we call linker tables in the system that will join things like dev deals to entities. So in this case, we have a dev deal table, we have an ID, and then the dev deal entity is going to have two ID fields up here, one for dev deals and one for entities. And that's going to join the two together. And then there's also going to be some information in there about what is the role of the entity for this particular dev deal, and all kinds of good information in these. This linker table concept is something that you'll run across quite a bit within the ProLink database. Another example would be like dev deals for portfolio properties. Again, we have our dev deals database table over here. And then in this case, there's actually a linker table called dev deal portfolio properties. Named well, it makes sense. And in that table, it's going to have, what is the dev deal ID, what is the portfolio property ID, and even some identifiers in here, whether or not it is the primary. There will be some scenarios where multiple things can be joined to the same dev deal, or multiple things can be joined to the same TC deal. There are going to be some things where you're going to join things together and your record count's going to grow, and you're going to wonder, why is that? And you might have to write some logic that says, well, I only want my primary. I want my primary property included in this query. So you might have to write extra logic to filter on that. And again, we got our linker table that would join dev deals to entities. And for example, tax credit deals has its own set of tables. And tax credit deals has tax credit deal properties, which can be joined to portfolio properties. But then it gets a little extra confusing because TC deals can actually join to dev deals. Dev deals can join to portfolio properties. And then you have to take into account things like what stage is a TC deal in, and because you can have multiple stages and snapshots. And that's where things get a little complicated. We're not going to go down that road today. We're going to keep it a little bit simple, or at least simpler, and we're going to work with primarily dev deals and portfolio properties. But as you can see, the more tables that you layer into your query, it is going to take some thoughtful planning and testing. What information are we included, and what do we want to include in our report? Okay, some common data types that you're going to run into. You're going to see int fields or integers. These are numbers. They're typically used as primary keys. They'll also be used as relationship identifiers. That's going to be your key in there that says, oh, this, if you see dev deal ID, that's going to be the ID of the ID field in the dev deals table. But they're going to be used for things that are just simple numbers, years, for example. Those would be integer fields. They're going to be different than numerics. No decimals in an integer. Varchar, varchar, however you like to say it. That's going to vary in size. It's used for text. You're going to see small, it might be 50 characters, 255 characters, might be something like max, which means it's unlimited. You'll see date times. Important to know, date times capture dates and timestamps. And I'll explain why that's important coming up. Numeric, they're going to be different sizes and decimal placements. So things like currency might be different than something that's going to be a large percentage where you need to go, quite a few more decimals out. And then bits. Bits are one of the most simple and earliest of data types. They're zeros and ones. So it's either going to be 0 or 1, but they indicate true or false, yes or no. Okay, so working with dates and times, these are going to be some helpful little tips as you're putting things together. There might be little bits of code that are going to help you return that data back in a way that's going to be useful for your custom data views or your reports. So for example, date time fields will always include a time value. So that might be perfect for your needs. You may want to know exactly the time a record was written, or something like a checklist was completed. However, there's also times where your report, you only want to see the date. And especially if it's only capturing the date, you may not want your report to always show like the date and like midnight, for example. So there is code, and this is kind of getting into that SQL and that structured query language. So here's a little example here. And again, these presentations will be made available to everyone. You can use this as hopefully some helpful resources, but you can do a convert command to convert it to a date. And there's lots of other things that you can do with dates too. If you only want to strip the year out of the date, the day, the month, there's lots of different commands that you can do out there. Google is your friend. That's a great place if you ever need to know, like, how do I take a date and take the time off of it, or I only want to extract the year. You can find an example out there for pretty much anything. Okay, bit fields. Again, as you see in this little sample query up here, a bit field is going to return zeros and ones. Well, you might want to return something that's a little more presentation friendly for your custom data view or your report. So you might want to use something like a case statement, which is going to say, hey, if the is preservation field equals a 1, give me a yes, else give me a no. If you ever use formulas in Excel, to kind of swap out text in the field or swap out information or evaluate whether a certain criteria is met, the same thing is going to apply for SQL statements and writing your queries. So it's going to be, your language is going to be a little bit different. But this would be an example of if you wanted to return yes or no, for example, for your is preservation, you can return like a text value instead of those zeros and ones. Working with null values. As you get into the database and work with different records, a lot of times you're going to come out with nulls. And database is going to say, no, not very friendly. You may want to change a null to something else. Or there might be times when you actually have to evaluate if it's null because you want to use a different field. So you can actually use a statement, in this case, something like an is null logic. So if you see down this statement below, we're going to say like if is null address 2, we're actually going to display an NA in place. So you'll see over here, we had nulls before, now we can display an NA. And you'll see as we actually get into our live example, we're going to take that concept a little bit further. Picklist tables. Okay, so this slide looks a little busy. But I want to point out a couple of concepts is that whenever you're working in things like dev deals, portfolio properties, the majority of the tables, you're going to run across pick list fields. The pick list field name and if we look at this kind of little dev deal results down here, dev deal status this PL underscore is always a very good indicator that it's a pick list. PL stands for pick list. And this PL underscore, whatever's after that, is going to be your name of the table up to the point where it says ID. So for example, dev deals, PL underscore dev deal status ID, you'll see values of 30s. Now, if you were to query the PL dev deal status table, you'll see that it also has a row in there with an ID of 30, and that's going to be your value. So whenever you're building a queries, for something like dev deals, if you want it to include the name of the pick list value as opposed to the number, and typically you're going to want to do that, you're going to need to join those pick list tables. Similar example down here with something like dev deal type. So you'll see we've got our PL dev deal type IDs of 2 and 12. A 12 is new construction, 2 would be a conversion. Okay. And what does that join look like? Well, here's an example where I've done a join. So I've joined dev deals and PL dev deal status dot name and PL dev deal type dot name. These are actually coming from these join statements down here. And these joins are going to be how we're going to be joining the dev deal table to the associated pick list. This concept's always going to be the same. No matter what pick list that you're joining to, typically, you're going to be writing some type of join statement like this. These are inner joins, and sometimes you might have fields that are null and don't have pick list values. You might have to write something a left join. I'll illustrate that concept because that's one thing that trips people up quite a bit. Hopefully when I show it live, it might make a little bit more sense. So these are an example of some join statements for reference. Again, you're going to want to join these tables to your dev deal table so that you can get that information and include things like the dev deal status of active and the dev deal type of conversion or new construction. So I know if you don't have a lot of experience with us or this type of stuff, this can get really confusing. But again, you'll have these slides to reference back to, and hopefully, as we get into the live demonstration, show some of these concepts and might help a little bit further. All right, working with UDFs. Like I said, we could probably have an entire session just on UDFs and how you use them. It can get very complicated. You really have to think through it. I did want to include it just because I know it's a question that we have come up, but you do have the option of including UDFs in your query. There are a number of tables there's 3 tables primarily that have UDF information in it. The UDF field or user defined field values table is where the values are. But depending on the type of UDF it is, whether it's numeric or date or true false or string, you have to write some logic to pull like which column of that table that you're going to be including that information from. Did want to include like how this references in here, because even the user defined field table itself can be used to determine what type of field it is. You can even get really complicated depending on your knowledge of SQL. You could write big pivot queries where you're pulling in all the UDFs and pivoting them across and including lots of them in there. We're not going to go that deep today, but maybe, if there's interest some point down the road, maybe we can do like a working with UDF special session. Okay, so now before you start and before I get into writing a custom query and putting together this actual custom data view, always recommend every single time create a plan. No matter how simple or complicated your custom data view is and your custom query is, create a plan. The first step in that plan is going to be create a list or a mock-up of the fields you need. I always will advocate when create a mock-up, what do you want your custom data view to look like after you've built it? What columns are going to be there? What's the text going to look like? Kind of visualize what it is that you're going to build. When in doubt, especially when it comes into should I include this column or not include this column, include it. You can always hide it in the column in the data view configuration later. You can hide that column, but if you're not sure, include it. Obviously, you can use your discretion there. I mean, you don't want to create a custom data view that's going to have 300 columns in there. It's going to be a nightmare to manage. But if you're on the fence and whether I should include total development costs or not, go ahead and put it in there. Okay. Identify the tables where those fields reside. Your user interface is going to be your big helper here, because there may be some instances where you're going to run across data fields that are duplicated in different areas of the system. So you may see something in dev that's also in TC deals. You may say something that's in portfolio properties that's also in dev. There's different places and without the system where you can store the same information. Go in the system and look. If you're not sure where you're storing a certain field or where that field is, you can typically find it pretty easily on the edit screens for like dev deal or portfolio property or TC deal. And you can see where those fields live. That will help you as you build your list and identifying those tables that you're going to need to pull data from. Ask the question, are there any counts? Are there totals? Are there calculations that you're going to need in your custom data view? So you do have the ability to do that. You can do totals by year. You can do totals, by dev deal stage, things like that. You can do that in your SQL query. And then finally, how will you test your results? So you're going to write your query, you're going to get a list of results back, but you're going to want to do some testing to make sure that you're getting all the results that you would expect. So identify maybe some other reports out there that you can use, maybe some other base data views that have the counts that you're looking for. But you want to make sure that the logic that you're building and everything that you're putting together, you kind of have some plan together for how you're going to test and how you're going to get that back. Ways to get help if you're stuck. I'm going to point this out there before we jump into the live demonstration and actually go and build a view. But we do have excellent ProLink HFA help documentation. There's topics in there about how to build a custom data view. So provide some guidance. It's not going to tell you how to write a pivot query in SQL, but it will tell you how to use the data view functionality, some things to look out for, some things where you might be getting stuck. We do have a data dictionary out there as well. Now, this data dictionary is growing. We're always adding information to this, description of fields. There's thousands of fields within the system. This will help you at least kind of identify some field names if you need to, identify some, what table those belong in. If you're not sure, like, I know I saw total development cost somewhere, what tables is that? Gives you some search capabilities to go find that fields. Use existing views for guidance. This is only going to work if you have access to your backup database and you have that SQL Management Studio tool. You can actually look at the database, and there are reporting views out there, and there are other views out there that are used for data views that you can open up, take a look at inside, and see what that that query looks like. That can be helpful if you're stuck on something, you're not sure how to go find a field. But fair warning too, I mean, some of those views themselves are incredibly complex. You may open it up, take a look at the query, get scared, run away. If that's the case, you can always reach out to customer support. You can always reach out to us, professional services. We do provide guidance and support. And if it comes to something that's extremely complicated and you get stuck, we can always write that custom data view for you. Okay, so let's actually build one. I'm going to build one live. This is always fun. We'll see how this goes. All right. So I'm going to actually start in my SQL Management Studio. This is what it looks like. It's going to give you access. Again, you're going to be connecting to your database backup that you have. So you may have to talk to your IT group, or you may already have access to that or get access to that. And they're going to provide you information on how to connect to it and how to get to your database. That's out of scope of today's demo. I'm already connected to our demo database. So what I'm going to do is, I'm connected to my database, but again, we're going to actually start with our plan. So as we get into our plan, I actually put a plan together. So as this is a plan, a mock-up that I put together, we've got, I want to pull together a custom data view that is, contains deal ID, I want deal name, I want fiscal year, deal status, deal stage. Those are some pick list fields. I want to include property names. So now we're going to have to join dev deals to properties, include a city. And then I'm going to actually build some custom logic. So things like, year rehabbed or when was it built, some total units, total LIHTC units, and then what's the percent of units that are LIHTC. So with that, I kind of visualize what I want my custom data view to look like. And then part of my plan is, well, let me capture these fields and what information do I need to get? This is an example of kind of like a table I always put together whenever it's working on a report or working on a custom data view. It helps track, like, what fields am I grabbing? What tables am I going to pull those fields from? And if it's a formula, what is that? So for like year built or rehab, I want to like if the rehab field is populated, then I want to use rehab, or else I want to use the year built. And even things like, percent of LIHTC units, there's not a field in there for that. So I'm going to have to write a calculation. I'm going to have to take the total of the LIHTC units and I'm going to have to divide it by the total units. So again, something like this, putting your plan together can be very helpful on kind of coming up with and give you that opportunity to think about first, what tables do I need to pull information from? What fields do I need to pull information from? And maybe even some notes. So like the row ID. I mentioned back in the rules that you have to have an auto or a unique identifier that's going to be used as your row ID field. And then even things like, oh, I'm going to have to go get this from a pick list table. So I've got my plan together. Again, this helps you kind of talk through what information you're going to need. And this will be your guidance as you start writing your query. So let's do that. Let's write a query. So I said that we're going to be wanting to pull dev deals. And I could start, if I'm just in here testing, I could say select star from dev deals. And star is a wildcard. And right off the bat, I'm going to say, you're not going to be allowed to do this in custom data view. But if I just wanted to, oops, and I've lost my connection. Forgot my phone. So that's what happens when you try to do one live and everybody's watching, you get a little bit of extra pressure. You might forget something. Again, that's when it helps go back to that plan. So we're going to say select star from dev deals A, and we're going to see I've got all these different fields that are going to come back from dev deals. But now really what I want to do is I want to start narrowing it down to the fields that I'm going to be using on my custom data view. Now, you may have noticed I put a letter after this dev deals, and what I'm doing is I'm actually aliasing my table. That is allowed when you're writing a SQL query. That is allowed when you're writing your custom data views. There's different approaches and thoughts on this. You can, call it something like DD if you wanted to, know that it's dev deals. Just for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use, alphabetical order, whatever tables A, B, C, D for. And that kind of helps shorten things down as you start joining things together and referencing different pieces. And as you see, one of the advantages of using SQL Management Studio is that it will suggest field names for you. Okay, so I can't use star in my custom data view, but I can, and I have to use, I'm going to use that ID as row ID as my very first field. And if I run that, I'm going to see I get, my row IDs. I'm going to get a whole bunch of values in here, and I've essentially started my custom data view at this point. One thing I always like to do, and as part of that testing plan that I've gotten in the habit of doing, is whenever I start small and I build onto it. I mean, you can write, and some people are wizards at this. They can write a 200-line SQL query. They can run it the first time. They can get everything that they want, and it's amazing. I'm not that good. I'm not that lucky. I usually start, add a couple of columns at a time, run it, make sure I'm continually testing and getting the results I want from that. So I'll point out is that when I did that, from dev deals, I got 2,807 rows. And so I'm going to keep that in my mind as I'm testing and I'm adding more information to this. All right. Also in my list, I had, deal name. So that's a column I'm going to want to include. And as you can see, it's going to suggest that for me. And I wanted deal fiscal year. That was the field I wanted to include as well. Do my test. I'm good. I'm starting to get things in here like deal name, deal fiscal year. Okay. Now, the rest of the fields that I had, if I go back to my plan and look at these in here, I've got some dev deal fields. I do have deal status and deal stage that I need to bring into that. So I could go ahead and join those now, but I think what I'll do first is I'll join portfolio properties. There's something I want to point out there. So back to my SQL query. Let's go ahead and join our portfolio properties. Now, if you recall, when we went back to our reference on dev deals and those relationships, I know that there's a linker table in there. That's going to join dev deals to portfolio properties. So it's actually like dev deal portfolio properties and then portfolio properties. For the sake of time, and so you don't have to watch me type all this out, I've actually got these already saved over here. So I'm going to bring this over. And then what this is going to do is it's going to join dev deal portfolio properties and then portfolio properties on my query. So now if I run it, I'm going to get my results again. And I can actually go in here and I should be able to include now my portfolio property fields. So when I have like property name, for example, if I run it, I'll see I get property names. So I'm bringing in property information. But one thing is that my count actually drops. So I had, a little over 2,800 rows before. Now I've got 2,572. The reason for that is because there's dev deals in the system that do not have associated portfolio properties. So if I wanted to, include dev deal information, you get into this concept of left joins versus inner joins. I'm not going to go deep on that today. For this case, I want to only include my dev deals that have portfolio properties because some of my key fields that I need are portfolio property fields. The other ones are going to be kind of test deals or things that aren't going to be as part of my use case in this scenario. However, that is something to bake into your testing plan. So, as you join things together, you may have data in there where it's not always going to have an associated record. So you want to kind of think ahead a bit. How do you want to approach that? Do you want to include null values? And that's what happens when you do something like a left join. It's going to say, give me everything from dev deal, but with or with not, or with or without, whether it has an associated portfolio property. We're going to do an inner join in this case and keep on going. So I've got my portfolio property fields. I'll include, let's see, as we go down our list, I can check my list and reference. I've got like, dev deal name, fiscal year. We still got status and stage that we want to include. And then also I need to pull in some of these calculated fields as well. So we're going to do this quickly. So let's get our pick list fields in here. So again, I went ahead and did that ahead of time. And one of the things that I found is like when I join my pick list together, so I've got like dev deal status, dev deal stage. When I first did it, I did an inner join on these. And if we see what happens if I do that first, run it. In this case, we're in good shape. So all of these fields in here, they had associated, pick list values, but there may be times with some pick lists that there's null values in there and you're not going to get fields back. In those cases, you may have to do a left join. Now that I've joined my deal status, my deal stage, I can actually start to include these in here as well. And I know just from experience that the name field is the value that I want to pull from a pick list. So if I get D name, E name, you'll see it's going to create name and name in there. But as we looked at our rules and things that we have to do for this, we actually have to do some explicit column references for these. So this, I'm going to actually have to give it a name. And we'll say D was dev deal status. And they can't be spaces, but I can use underscores. And we'll have to do the same thing for the deal stage. Okay. All right. So now you can see my query starting to come together. We've got, our deals, we've got some property fields, we've got dev deal status, we've got dev deal stage. Still, if I go back to my plan, got a couple of other things that I want to pull together. And just in the sake of time, I'm going to skip your build or rehab. Or actually, what I could do is I can just go ahead and drop those in because I want to show how they work. And then also, we can go ahead and pull in total units, total LIHTC units. So back to my query, I could pull in here, for example, again, total units. The total LIHTC units. Now I've got those total units and fields. If I run, we'll see those. All right. So let's say I wanted to do that calculation now, and I wanted to do my my percentage of the total LIHTC units and total units. I can already tell I'm going to have a problem because if I'm looking down here in my data, I can see I've got fields in here that I don't always have values, and I've got total units that may not always have values in there as well. Now, one of the advantages of working in something like SQL Management Studio is I can give it a try. This would be my backup database. I could say, what would happen if I said, see that total LIHTC units, and then divided that by C dot total units as total %. I can type that out. It's going to be a valid formula, valid function. I can run it. What's going to happen is I'm going to run into a divide by 0 error encounter. If you've ever worked with databases, if you ever worked with queries, this is something that will drive people crazy. What's going on? Why do I have fields in there? Where my zeros are coming from. In those cases, you're going to have to kind of do a little bit more planning, and you're going to have to write some extra logic that's going to, in this case, I'm going to go grab a case statement that I went ahead and put together just for time. And you're going to have to do something like this. You're going to have to evaluate, is total units greater than 0? And if it is, then I'm going to have to do some formatting and checking to see if there's nulls. This is that time component when I talk about, give yourself time to write some of these logic, because, something that is easy is like, oh, I just have to take total LIHTC units and divide by total units, can turn into, well, now I've got to write, formulas and logics and things to kind of evaluate all this criteria and get that out. But now, as you can see, once you put that time in and once you write that information out and get it all together, you can actually get, valid results. So I can get my 90% now. All right. So I can continue to work on this. I can continue to build it. I can continue to add to it. I can go in and I can add, for example, my logic for if I want to use, development year or uses the rehab year or the other year. I can do that. But right now, sake of time, we're running, towards the end of this session. Let's go ahead and use this as a custom data view. Again, the value and the advantage of writing this out in SQL Management Studio is that you can do your testing, you can do that validation, you can get your results, you can see that, basically this is what I would expect to see when I go build my custom data view. All right, so once you've tested it, once you like it, I'm going to copy this because now I'm going to go over to the data views area of HFA. I'm going to click on this just to make sure, because it may have timed me out by now. I might have to log in again. But over in admin and data views, and I will reiterate that you do have to have permissions to do this. If you can't do this, talk to your system administrator, see if they can go ahead and grant you the rights and grant you the access to do this. Once I get logged in here again, I will go ahead and drop this in. Okay, so I'm in data views. I'm going to click new. And we'll let the screen come up. I'm going to give it a name. So we'll see, call this ProLink Tech Live Demo. The view name. Now the view name cannot contain spaces. I typically like to put my initials on the view name because what it's actually going to do is it's going to create a real view in the database. And that's helpful. So if you ever need to go like, hey, who built this one? I like it. Or who built this one? It's causing problems. You can go track down who that is. So I'll call this Tech Live Demo. And then you don't even have to bother with these fields right now. The main thing that you want is your SQL query. Again, we ran it over there. We tested it. And if I click save, it's going to save our custom data view now. And a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, it's going to queue this up for ETL. So it's going to start getting this prepared and get ready for the ETL data copy that's going to happen. But also it's going to give me the option to validate, test, and save. even if everything looked good in SQL Management Studio, you have to do this as well. You have to do your validate, test, and save here in the custom data view functionality. And what that's going to do, it's going to run its own checks. It's going to check for those things that I mentioned on that slide for, is there an SSN field in there? Did you call everything distinct? Do you have the row ID? And as you can see, we adhere to all the rules. And now we've got our custom data view here in preview. So everything looks great. These are the results I would expect. Again, I would be looking at my test plan and do I have everything that I need? But my step to really kind of finish this out and finish my job for the custom data view is I want to move this to published. And when I click save, it's going to go ahead and queue this up for the ETL run. Now, as I mentioned, it's not going to be available to everyone yet because this ETL job has not completed. It hasn't run. That is scheduled. I do know that in our case, in this demo environment, it's scheduled to run tonight. I can cheat a little bit over here. I can go to utilities and run this job. Actually, it's under admin. I can go to admin and I can go to ETL and I can kick it off. So this is going to tell me, when it was last run. I can run it now. I'm in a demo environment. I'm going to go ahead and do that because I want to show now that it's run. And it does take a few seconds, a little bit of time to run. But when that happens, that custom data view will show up in the custom data view list. Now, it hasn't completed running, so it's not a run yet. Here's one that I did create ahead of time. And actually, I'm going to love to see the one that we just created. So let's go back to data views. If you ever need to find your data view, make any changes to it, for me, since I put that prefix on there, I know I can always go easily find. But it will be in that list. Here's our Tech Live demo one. And then once it's created, then you can go in and start, managing your columns, which ones are included, what types are they. I would know, for example, like deal fiscal year, if it's a number, it's going to show a commas in it. I want it to show as text, so I can go ahead and change that. And then as I go back over to our data views, hopefully our ETL job is run. We'll see it in the list. And there it is, ProLink Tech Live Demo. So this is how it would display to everyone. I can go click and run it. Again, all of that data for that view got copied over to the ETL data warehouse. Now you're going to see our deal names, our deal fiscal years, and here's that percentage and our calculated fields and everything that we included on that. Now, granted, there was some complexity with this. We joined some tables together, wrote some calculations, but sometimes, you may be joining 15 different tables and pulling fields together. So reiterate, have that plan in place, give yourself time, reach out for help if you get stuck. We love jumping in and kind of helping out and, providing that guidance where we can. But hopefully this was helpful. Again, this presentation will be made available. You can go back, pull some of those little tips and tricks off of there. And, looking forward to everybody getting out there and writing some custom data views.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, I'm going to steal back the screen just to wrap us up. This was great. And this is definitely one of the advanced courses that we're offering this time. So as Tom just shared, make sure that you reach out to us if we can help guide you through this process. And if you don't know necessarily who in your organization would be responsible or, have the skill set to support this for you, please reach out to us and we can help with that as well. We want to make sure that if you'd like to use it or you think there's benefits here for your organization, we can explore the possibilities of getting you to utilize this. So, and this was also, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but this was definitely a user group. This is something that our own user group sponsored and pushed through to development. So very cool to see this come to fruition. Tom, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining this session, and I hope you found it valuable. As a reminder, under resources, you can find that PowerPoint presentation and the recording. You can come back to watch that recording anytime for the next 90 days on Cvent, and then you can download that material at any point as well. Let's see here for coffee and bagel. So there is also, you can see there's a survey link now on your the right hand side of your screen. Please provide any feedback you have on this session, any outstanding questions, any comments. Certainly we'll address those. And that concludes day 1 of ProLink Tech Live for us for 2023. So thank you all for attending. Day 2 will begin tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, and we're going to start the day with a what's new and what's coming for ProLink HFA. This is a pre-recorded session, followed by a discussion on Budget Pro, and then we will have 2 additional ProLink HFA software sessions, training sessions following that. If you head back to the conference homepage now, you will see the 3 people listed who won gift cards today by participating in our coffee and bagel. We have Lori Gray with Wyoming CDA. Thank you, Lori. Laura Lind with Idaho HFA. Thank you, Laura. And then Diane Bodsford with Virginia Housing. So thanks, Diane. It was great to speak with you guys. Thank you. We hope you enjoy your gift cards, your little treat from us. And we encourage you to continue participating in those rooms tomorrow for coffee and bagel for the chance to win some prizes. And with that, have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Thanks again for joining us for ProLink Technology Live. We'll see you then.